My journey didn't start off quite as planned. I was supposed to be heading to a conference in Minneapolis on Thursday and Friday, but the send-off from my wife, Claire, wasn't what I'd come to expect. Normally, Claire would take half a day off work to make my departure special. She'd see me off with coffee, snacks, the whole 9 yards. But this time, all I got was a quick peck on the cheek before she hurried out the door. Felt odd, and I brushed it off, though I couldn't shake the nagging feeling. For some background, I'm Sam, 49 years old, and I've been married to Claire for 24 years. We have 2 kids, Liam, who's 22, and Olivia, who just turned 20. That Thursday, I left work at 3 p.m. to head straight to the airport, wanting to avoid the stress of last-minute boarding. My flight was set for 6 p.m., and everything seemed fine as I settled into the waiting area, expecting a smooth trip. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on my side. A heavy snowstorm was rolling into Minnesota, and my flight was delayed by 45 minutes. When we finally boarded, I was relieved, thinking we'd get there just a bit late. But 30 minutes into the flight, I noticed the plane making a subtle turn. At first, I thought it was just a minor adjustment, but it soon became clear we were heading back. The pilot confirmed it. We couldn't land in Minneapolis due to the storm and had to return to our departure airport. Once we touched down, I rushed to the airline's check-in desk and managed to secure one of the last seats on the first flight out the next morning. Even though I'd missed part of the conference, I was determined to make it. After leaving a message for my contact in Minneapolis and another for my boss, I decided to call home, hoping for a bit of comfort from Claire. But when I called, there was no answer. I checked the house when I got there and found it dark, her car missing from the driveway. My luggage still in the car. I entered cautiously, and the sound of voices caught me off guard. For a moment, I thought Claire had come home after all, but it turned out the TV had been left on. That struck me as odd. I distinctly remembered turning it off before I left. A strange feeling crept over me. I silenced the TV, took a look around, and dialed her cell. She finally picked up, her voice warm as she asked where I was. Her tone sounded friendly, but there was a strange undercurrent to it, like she was trying to piece something together. She said she was just at home, catching up on her shows. As she spoke, the exhaustion from my long day set in, yet I couldn't shake the strange feeling in my gut. All I wanted in that moment was to be with Claire, to find comfort in her presence, even if only for a short while. Despite the flight delay and my disrupted plans, I held on to the hope that we could share a few unexpected, joyful hours together in our own bed. But that hope dissolved as I sat there in silence, realizing with a sickening feeling that something was deeply wrong. Instead of the warm embrace I'd expected from the woman I'd trusted for 24 years, I was met with a creeping sense of lies and deceit. It was a blow that left me speechless. The thought of her cheating on me felt both impossible and, in that moment, terribly real. I had no idea where this could have happened. At work, with friends, or somewhere I'd never suspected. I must have gone quiet because eventually Claire's concerned voice came through the phone. "Sam, are you still there?" Her words jolted me out of my thoughts. Yeah, sorry. We just landed back at O'Hare, and I have to go." The words were clumsy, but I couldn't summon anything else. I ended the call abruptly, and when she called back a few moments later, I turned off my phone, needing space to think. I sank into the couch, surrounded by the silence of our empty house. A numbness washed over me as my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Why would Claire lie to me? Was there a reasonable explanation for her behavior? My mind flashed back to our 20th wedding anniversary 4 years ago, when I'd woven my own web of deceptions to surprise her with a 2-week cruise. I had even enlisted her boss and parents, creating elaborate excuses to keep her off the trail. I'd managed to keep it all a secret, and she'd been completely surprised. I wanted to believe that maybe she was planning something similar, but the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. Yet I couldn't fully accept the idea. Not us, I thought. We wouldn't be in this situation. It's unthinkable. But here I was, faced with the uncomfortable truth that I might not know my own wife as well as I thought. One person came to mind who might shed some light on the situation. My daughter, Olivia. Maybe she'd know if her mother had mentioned anything unusual. I quickly dialed Olivia's number from memory, and her familiar, warm voice greeted me. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" I asked about her day, and she told me she just finished up her homework and was watching some TV. I felt a pang of longing for the days when everything had seemed simpler, and I was just her dad, the man who could fix anything. Trying to sound casual, I asked, "Hey, honey, have you spoken to your mom recently? Did she mention anything unusual?" Olivia paused. "Well, we had our usual weekly phone call on Sunday." "Why? Did something happen?" Her response gave me a sliver of hope. Maybe Claire was planning a surprise and just hadn't said anything yet. Trying to keep my tone light, I added, "Oh, nothing big. I just thought maybe your mom might be planning something. You know, a surprise." I didn't want specifics if there was anything to know, just some hint that might ease my mind. But Olivia's answer quickly dashed my hopes. "No, Dad," she replied. "Mom didn't mention anything like that. She didn't seem any different." With that response, my heart sank, and the uneasy feeling returned stronger than ever. Olivia picked up on my unease immediately, asking, "Dad, is everything okay?" Scrambling to sound casual, I replied, "Oh, it's nothing serious, sweetheart. Your mom's just been acting a bit oddly lately." I thought maybe she was hiding a pleasant surprise for me, maybe something belated for my 50th, but Olivia quickly dismissed that notion, reminding me that we'd already celebrated my birthday last month. I realized I wasn't going to get any answers from her, so I wished her a good night, though I knew my tone was probably off. Her hesitant reply suggested that even she felt something was wrong. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a quiet sadness settle over me. The hope I'd had for a simple surprise had all but faded. I sat back, mind racing. Why would Claire deceive me? Various explanations swirled in my head. Maybe it was related to her push for that promotion. It seemed plausible, but I couldn't fathom why she'd lie about it. Still, she had been staying late at work more often lately, saying she needed to dedicate herself fully to this goal. And yet, something felt off. Claire and I had discussed her work commitments before, and she knew I wanted her to cut back on hours now that the kids were grown. A job promotion, in theory, was fine, but I'd hoped that with more flexibility in our lives, she'd want to prioritize spending time together like we used to. Ironically, it brought to mind the choice I'd made years ago, a choice that had shaped our marriage since. It had been almost 5 years since I was offered a promotion that could have changed our family's life. I'd been offered the position of Vice President of Finance at my company, a role that would have required frequent travel to the headquarters in Chicago, along with visits to various factories across the country. At first, I was thrilled. I'd worked hard for the opportunity, and it was validation of my efforts. But Claire had her reservations. A close colleague of mine had recently gone through a divorce shortly after accepting a similar position. His financial success came at a tremendous personal cost, and his story weighed heavily on Claire. Our kids were still in school back then, and she didn't want the burden of raising them alone if my career took over our lives. After long, difficult conversations, I saw the truth in her concerns. We both wanted a strong, united family, and I was on the verge of losing sight of that. So, I turned down the promotion, choosing time with Claire and the kids over the prestige and pay of the VP title. Now, with our kids in college, it was just Claire and me. And while I had been content with my decision, lately I'd noticed Claire's focus narrowing in on her own career advancement. It was natural, I supposed, this was her time to focus on her ambitions. But with her relentless hours and the distance I'd begun to feel between us, it was as though the very sacrifices I'd made for our family were now haunting me. And the question lingered, unsettled. Was this drive for a promotion all it was? Or was there something deeper going on? I'd always believed Claire's promotion would be a positive step, something attainable with minimal disruption to our lives. But as her work hours stretched into weekends, leaving me with barely an hour or two of her time each day, it began to weigh heavily on my heart. Our brief moments together lacked the warmth and connection we once shared. Evenings became painfully silent as Claire, exhausted from her job, would collapse into bed with no energy for conversation, let alone intimacy. It had been months, long enough that the specifics of our last truly intimate moment had blurred into a depressing haze. Part of me chalked it up to age, but I couldn't ignore the creeping sadness of what we'd lost. Maybe her odd behavior was simply a way of hiding behind her work commitments, avoiding a conversation we both knew was overdue. Still, I had to admit that I, too, had often been caught up with work, business trips, late nights, and overtime. But this time, the suspicion gnawed at me, refusing to let go. There was one way to get answers: calling Claire's direct line at her advertising agency. Maybe a quick conversation with her would ease my mind. I dialed, half expecting her voice to pick up, but to my surprise, it was her colleague, Jack Harper, who answered. Trying to hide my alarm, I quickly composed myself. "Hey, Jack, it's Sam," I said, using the familiar nickname I knew Claire's coworkers would recognize. Jack's response, however, completely threw me. "Hey, Sam, weren't you supposed to be on vacation with Claire? Thought you two were off for a while." The shock must have been obvious, but I did my best to keep my voice steady. "Vacation?" I repeated, trying to process this unexpected twist. "Oh yeah," Jack continued, apparently oblivious to my confusion. "She said you two were taking some time off together." Realizing the gravity of the situation, I forced myself to recover. "Oh, yeah, sorry, I must have dialed the wrong number," I stammered. "Just wanted to check something." "But, never mind. No problem," Jack replied, completely unbothered. "She owes me lunch, actually, for covering her shifts this week. I've been working late. It's 9 already, and I'm still here." As I hung up, a chilling realization began to settle in. Claire hadn't been working late. She'd taken vacation time. And if she wasn't with me, then where was she? A creeping panic gripped me as I faced the grim possibilities. I desperately wanted to believe she was with her sister Isabella, or perhaps on some solo trip for reflection. But the deeper, more sinister thought refused to be ignored. Could she really be deceiving me? Could Claire, the woman I'd loved and trusted for nearly half my life, be with someone else right now? My mind drifted back to those days when we'd been close with Claire's sister, Isabella, and her ex-husband, Alex. Our lives had been deeply intertwined. We were practically family, spending countless evenings and weekends together, supporting one another, celebrating birthdays, even vacationing as a group. Back then, I never would have thought anything could come between us. But everything changed on a day that I could never forget. I'd come home early, feeling the effects of a relentless headache. After taking a couple of Tylenol, I lay down on the couch, hoping to rest. About half an hour later, I heard the front door open, and Claire and Isabella's laughter filled the house as they returned from a shopping trip. They didn't notice me lying there quietly, trying to relax. Then I heard Isabella's voice cut through their conversation. She asked Claire if she'd noticed the new product manager at the grocery store. My heart began to beat a little faster as I tuned in, straining to hear every word. To my disbelief, Claire casually replied that, yes, she'd noticed him and thought he was attractive, and that he had smiled at her. But then, Isabella, with a mischievous tone, said something I couldn't unhear. She remarked that it would be even better if he was smiling at her after their encounter in the back seat of her car the day before. My stomach twisted as I lay there, unable to believe what I was hearing. Claire's reply made my pulse quicken. She disapproved, cautioning her sister to be careful, warning her that she could risk losing Alex if she got caught. But Isabella brushed off the concern, confidently assuring Claire that she was always careful. With that, they left the room, their laughter and conversation fading, leaving me in stunned silence. As someone who values honesty and integrity, I felt utterly shaken. I had just overheard a conversation that revealed Isabella's infidelity, and the knowledge weighed heavily on me. I knew that if Alex found out, it would devastate him. He would likely end the marriage, possibly kick her out, and it would be a turning point for their family. Was I ready to be the one to deliver this life-shattering news? At that moment, I didn't know what to do. But the conflict grew even more complicated when Claire came home with the kids later that evening. She had shown disapproval of her sister's actions, and that gave me some comfort. So, I decided to wait and discuss it with her later, hoping she could help me make sense of the situation. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, I finally brought up the subject. I was careful with my words, explaining what I'd overheard and how troubled I was by Isabella's actions. Her initial expression was one of genuine shock, and when I asked what she thought I should do, she took a thoughtful pause. She began slowly, weighing her words carefully. "Well, it might depend on the circumstances," she said. Various factors needed to be considered before taking action. To understand her viewpoint better, I presented hypothetical scenarios. I asked her, if Alex had been the one who'd been unfaithful, maybe picking up a woman at a bar, would we ignore it? Or would we feel obligated to step in? The weight of the situation pressed down on me as I tried to make sense of what to do. Suddenly, Claire sat up in bed, her face a mix of determination and anger. She grabbed her phone, clearly ready to call Isabella and confront her about the betrayal. Instinctively, I reached over and gently took the phone from her. "Let me handle this," I told her, trying to convey calm and resolve. Claire looked at me with doubt. "What exactly are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to talk to Alex myself," I replied, confident in my decision. "Isabella needs to face the consequences of her actions. She can't keep doing this." Claire nodded, her expression resolute. "If Alex decides to kick her out, he's not staying here. I won't let a cheater into our home," she said firmly, her voice unyielding. I was grateful for her support. Taking a steadying breath, I dialed Alex's number. He answered warmly, his usual easygoing self, greeting me as his favorite brother-in-law. But as I sighed and struggled to find the words, my tone must have changed, because he went silent. "Alex," I began carefully, "I need to tell you something. Something that I overheard." My voice was low, almost apologetic. "It's about Isabella. She hasn't been faithful." I overheard her talking about, well, an encounter just the other day. There was a long silence on the other end of the line as Alex absorbed what I was telling him. When he finally spoke, his voice was faint, filled with disbelief. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure it was my Isabella?" I confirmed that I'd heard it directly from her, explaining that she had talked about it without remorse, almost as if she were boasting. "I'm so sorry, Alex," I said, struggling with my own emotions. "But we're here for you. Whatever you need, we're here." Alex thanked me quietly, then hung up. The weight of what I'd just done hit me, and I sat there, feeling the enormity of it. Claire's eyes were filled with sadness as she looked at me. She reached over, placing a hand on my arm, and whispered, "I'm proud of you for doing the right thing." She pulled me into a hug, and I held her, feeling both a sense of loss and comfort. After a few moments, I suggested that maybe Alex and Isabella could try therapy to help them make sense of everything. Claire sighed, looking doubtful. "I don't know. I'm not sure therapy would change anything. People who stray tend to do it again." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Later that night, as I was drifting into a restless sleep, the phone rang. Groggy and trying not to disturb Claire, I picked it up. It was Isabella, her voice furious. "What did you tell Alex?" she demanded. "Yes, I told Alex the truth," I replied to Isabella, keeping my voice steady. "Sometimes, when we stray from honesty, it catches up to us in ways we never expect." I emphasized the importance of accountability, a quality she seemed to have disregarded. Isabella's voice became more desperate, anger giving way to sobs as she revealed that Alex had thrown her out of the house. She begged me for advice, her voice breaking as she asked if she could stay with us. Reluctantly, I replied, "Isabella, we can't offer you refuge after what you've done. This is a consequence you need to face on your own." The shock in her silence was palpable. Her pleas grew frantic, but I knew I couldn't give in. I looked over to Claire for support, needing reassurance myself. She leaned over and spoke firmly into the phone, saying, "We don't want a cheater in our house, Isabella. You'll have to find somewhere else." Together, we made our stance clear. She was no longer welcome in our lives. We didn't want her visiting or calling. And, for the first time, Claire's voice held the resolve I needed to hear. Once we'd hung up, Claire nestled close to me, whispering that she was proud of how I'd handled everything. We found solace in each other, finally drifting off to sleep with a shared sense of relief. The next morning, however, brought an unwelcome surprise. Claire's father called, his voice shaking with anger as he demanded to know why we had abandoned Isabella in her time of need. Claire looked shaken and tearful after the call, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. We made this decision together, I reminded her, hoping to steady her. Isabella's actions caused so much pain. Sometimes, standing by our choices means holding firm, but I could tell her father's words had struck a chord. Sensing her doubts, I gently posed a question to clarify things. If we were so willing to expose Isabella's betrayal, then how would we feel if Alex had been unfaithful? Wouldn't we owe him the same truth? Claire was quiet, searching for a response, and finally replied, Isabella's family. That's different. I felt a pang of disappointment at her answer. So, family ties make cheating acceptable? I asked quietly. Claire didn't reply, and I could see her grappling with the contradiction. That conversation stayed with us, an unspoken boundary marking our stance on Isabella. Nearly 3 years ago, I finally had a critical conversation with Claire, making it clear that I didn't want Isabella near our children or in our home. While Claire occasionally visited her sister secretly, it was an unspoken taboo in our household. When I was away, Claire would slip away to see her, but I had stopped caring about Isabella's presence. In time, Alex moved on, preparing for remarriage, and my resentment toward Isabella faded. Now, I found solace in the calm of our home, comforted by her absence and the peace it brought to my life. I shifted my attention back to Claire, feeling the need to finally address the nagging questions I had about her behavior. Despite everything, I approached the subject gently. Part of me suspected she might feel guilty for deceiving me, though by now I wasn't sure I cared anymore. At some point, I must have drifted off because I found myself dreaming I was at a conference, standing in front of a vast audience. As I began speaking about the types of people who either deny reality or face it head-on, I noticed Claire's boss, Dan Parker, waving wildly from the crowd, laughing as he admitted to avoiding my wife. Beside him, Jack Harper nodded, sharing his own joke about dodging Claire. The crowd chuckled, and a moment of shared amusement washed over the audience as I stood there, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The next thing I knew, I was wiping drool from my face on the couch. It was midnight, and I'd been out for over an hour. For a moment, I thought maybe Claire had returned without noticing I was there. I hurried to the bedroom, but it was empty. The growing silence settled around me as it dawned on me that she might be with her sister, Isabella. For a second, I considered calling Isabella to ask if Claire was with her, but that would mean acting behind Claire's back. My hesitation grew as I remembered that, years ago, I'd had to pick up Isabella's kids once from a friend's house, so I might still have her number somewhere. Just as I pulled out my phone to search, I noticed the Find My Phone app on my screen. I'd installed it on both our phones a year ago after losing mine on a trip. Now, it seemed like an obvious next step. I opened the app, and within seconds, Claire's location popped up, Mills Lake. I paused, puzzled. Mills Lake was known for its upscale residences, elegant lakeside estates, stone walls, and prices well beyond what we could ever afford. I knew Isabella couldn't afford a place there either, especially given her recent financial struggles. Using Google Earth, I zoomed in to pinpoint her exact location. And there it was, an exclusive, sprawling estate surrounded by high stone walls. The sight left me baffled. What could Claire possibly be doing in a place like that? Mills Lake was nearly an hour's drive from our town, but the determination to uncover the truth pushed me forward. I could already anticipate that any conversation with Claire would lead to evasions or half-truths. If there was one thing I needed, it was irrefutable evidence before I confronted her. Flooded with a mix of anger, betrayal, and resolve, I grabbed my keys and set out for Mills Lake, cursing myself for not considering the possibility of her wrongdoing sooner. Regret gnawed at me as I realized that I should have checked Claire's GPS locator from the start instead of rationalizing her actions. I'd been making excuses, clinging to the hope that her behavior had an innocent explanation. Now, as I arrived at Mills Lake, a wave of uncertainty clouded my mind. Part of me wanted a straightforward explanation, something that could erase my doubts and put my fears to rest. The estate where Claire's location was marked stood just ahead, but a massive gate blocked direct access. I wasn't about to drive up and announce my presence, so I assessed my options. Parking by the roadside might attract attention, and in a neighborhood this exclusive, that likely meant security or even the police. I drove a bit farther, spotting a narrow path near the lake and deciding to park there, hidden from sight. Stepping out, I was hit with a surge of uncertainty. How was I supposed to get past the towering walls and reach her? Then it hit me. The estate bordered the lake. I could approach from that side. With renewed determination, I made my way to the lake shore, my heart pounding as I searched for an entry point. The shore offered a secluded path that led toward the estate, and I followed it cautiously, keeping my movements quiet. As I moved closer, I checked Claire's GPS locator one more time to confirm her location. Eventually, I reached a large, luxurious mansion with several second-floor windows still lit, though the ground floor was dimly lit, casting only a faint glow. From where I stood, one curtain was slightly open, allowing a warm light to spill outside. I found a sturdy tree near the edge of the property, and after a moment's hesitation, I climbed it to get a better vantage point. Peering through the window, I saw an older man in a white terrycloth robe who quickly disappeared from view. Moments later, a woman emerged, and my suspicions were confirmed. It was Isabella, dressed in an open robe, sipping champagne as though she didn't have a care in the world. Despite everything, I couldn't deny that she still looked striking for her age. As I watched, the pieces began to fall into place. Claire had come here, possibly pulled into whatever lifestyle Isabella had become a part of. This wasn't the kind of life I wanted for her, and it certainly wasn't the one I'd signed up for when we married. Watching the scene unfold left me feeling disheartened. The man reappeared, approaching Isabella and placing his hands on her waist, drawing her in as he took her champagne glass and set it aside. His hands roamed over her body in a way that made me instinctively look away. What I saw clashed with everything I valued. This display was hollow, lacking the warmth and connection that, for me, made love real. As I grappled with the weight of what I was witnessing, the thought of what all this might mean for Claire loomed large. Climbing down from the tree, I caught sight of Claire. She sat on a distant couch, draped in a robe that hung open, her face flushed with a foolish, inebriated smile. The sight struck a final blow to my heart, sealing the fate of our marriage. I took a step back, overwhelmed, but lost my footing in my haste. Tumbling from the tree, I was lucky to escape with only minor scrapes and bruises. As I limped to my car, the pain wasn't from the fall. It was from the shattering realization of betrayal. For a brief moment, I considered barging into the mansion, confronting her and everyone involved. But reality quickly sank in. The consequences of a rash action, trespassing charges, assault, maybe even jail time, held me back. This wasn't the way forward. Alone with my thoughts, a storm of emotions raged within me. Sadness, anger, disbelief, all threatened to consume me. But I knew I couldn't let my anger win. No matter how betrayed I felt, I would never resort to violence against Claire. As I calmed myself, a clear, simple plan emerged. I would return home, pack my things and leave. With separate incomes and no dependent children, a no-fault divorce would be fairly straightforward. We'd split what we owned and move on. But as I thought about it more, I felt a surge of bitterness. Part of me craved some kind of justice, a sense that she would feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. An idea took root. Clutching my phone tightly, I dialed Claire's number, half expecting her not to answer. As I predicted, my call went straight to voicemail. I took a deep breath and started recording my message, carefully controlling my tone to sound casual. "Hey, honey," I began brightly. "Since you didn't pick up the home phone, I thought I'd give you a ring on your mobile. Just wanted to give you a heads up so you're not alarmed when you hear my keys in the door in a few minutes." I paused, then continued, weaving a story about the chaos of my travel delay due to a blizzard. I told her our flight had been diverted to Chicago but that we were finally en route and should be landing soon. I'm not sure exactly when we'll be back, but I'm guessing I'll be home in about 30 minutes, I said, my voice calm and even. See you soon. Then I hung up, knowing she'd receive a notification about a new voicemail would likely set her nerves on edge. Calling at this time was already out of the ordinary, which I knew would heighten her anxiety. I pictured her, drunk and scrambling to check the voicemail, trying to process the implications through her haze. I silently hoped that in her intoxicated state, she'd be too distracted to realize that I couldn't actually be calling mid-flight. By now, panic had probably set in, and I felt a twisted satisfaction in imagining her rushing to cover up her lies and deceit, her night of fun quickly unraveling. As I ended the call, my suspicions confirmed, I waited quietly, watching as Claire's car exited the estate gates and sped down the highway. My heart lurched as I saw her nearly swerve off the road. She was clearly more intoxicated than I'd realized. My frustration mingled with a deep sadness. This was the woman I had once loved without reservation, now recklessly endangering herself and others. Despite everything, the thought of her risking her life, especially as the mother of our children, was too much to bear. Determined to ensure her safety, I made the quick decision to follow her. But as I watched her veer and swerve, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I dialed emergency services, describing her erratic behavior, her near collisions, and the make and model of her car. I even provided the last 4 digits of her license plate, emphasizing how urgent it was to get her off the road before something tragic happened. The operator assured me that a patrol car would be dispatched, and I continued to follow Claire, keeping a safe distance while navigating through the traffic. 2 exits later, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car in my rearview mirror. The patrol car caught up with her, lights blazing, and signaled her to pull over. I drove past them, feeling a complex mix of relief, sorrow, and something akin to finality. 45 minutes later, I finally arrived home. The weight of the evening settled heavily on me, each revelation adding to the irony and heartbreak of it all. In a single night, someone I had trusted with my heart had unraveled everything we'd built together, reducing her life, and, by extension, ours, to a series of reckless decisions and unfortunate consequences. The realization that Claire's actions could have led to a fatal accident, a grief that would have crushed our children, was sobering. I sat in silence, reflecting on the fragility and preciousness of life. My love for Claire was no longer the guiding force it had once been. It wasn't that I'd stopped loving her entirely, but I could no longer see a future where we were together. I needed time and space to gather my thoughts, to process the reality of the choices before me. Turning off the home phone and silencing my mobile, I finally allowed myself to confront the truth of the evening. The simplest explanation for Claire's deception had been right in front of me all along. Somewhere along the way, she had chosen a path of lies and betrayal, and I'd been unwilling to see it. I poured myself a glass of wine, the red liquid swirling in the glass like my thoughts, unsettled and painful. For years, I had believed that my love for Claire would age like fine wine, growing richer and deeper with time. But now, sitting alone and looking at the stark reality of our strained relationship, I was left questioning everything. The love that once formed the foundation of our lives now felt like it had turned to vinegar, leaving a sour bitterness that tore through me. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the sudden, jarring realization that the love we had built over 26 years, the life we had built together as husband and wife, had withered without me even seeing it. Without her, I felt like a ship lost at sea, drifting without purpose or direction. Could I really move forward without the life I'd always known? The ache of it all pressed down on me, and for one dark moment, I considered giving up, finding an escape from the pain in the most final way possible. Starting fresh felt insurmountable. How was I supposed to build a future when the person I had shared every plan and every decision with was gone? For as long as I could remember, family had been my focus. Every choice I made had been with Claire and the kids in mind, every path taken with their well-being at the forefront. Even as we grew older and the kids moved on, I had clung to the hope that we would rediscover each other, spending our days together as partners in the life we'd built. But that hope now seemed hopelessly naive. Loneliness settled over me like a heavy fog. I had no one to share my life with, no one to lean on. For the first time in my life, loneliness became a stark and uninvited companion. I couldn't help but ask myself, why? Why had she chosen this path, one filled with deceit, instead of the honesty of a straightforward divorce? That, though painful, would have at least preserved some respect for what we'd shared. Had she endured our relationship, biding her time until our children were grown and gone? When had her love for me turned cold? When had her attention faded away? I had viewed this phase of our lives as a chance to invest even more in each other, to rekindle our connection as a couple. I hadn't realized that, for her, it was the end of our shared journey. I thought of her lover, a stranger who had somehow wormed his way into her life, and, in a way, into mine. The two of them together, leaving me isolated and unloved, made it painfully clear that we were no longer partners. But in the midst of my despair, my pain felt like the only thing that connected me to life. It was a raw, agonizing reminder of everything I had lost, and as I sat there, I found myself clinging to it as if it were all I had left. The best memories of our life together, moments of laughter, love, and the cherished presence of our children, filled my thoughts as I sat in the dark. In that difficult moment, Liam and Olivia became my guiding light, casting a glimmer of hope over the abyss I was in. Though my self-esteem had crumbled, and I felt too weak to pull myself out, just thinking about them sparked something in me. A faint drive to preserve myself, if only for their sake. Soon, Liam and Olivia would have their own lives, maybe even families, and the thought of that future gave me a sense of purpose. If I was to face that new reality without their mother by my side, I'd have to distance myself from the pain, even though I knew it would be no easy task. I realized I'd always carry the memory of Claire, the love we shared and the family we built together, but I would also carry her betrayal. I couldn't keep subjecting myself to the constant ache, a wound that would never heal if I stayed close to her. As I continued to sip my wine, I pondered the future and the life I'd have to rebuild from scratch. The love that had once defined me was gone, but I still had my children and, somehow, a future. I knew I had to move forward, even if the path ahead was murky. I resolved to find a way out of the darkness, holding on to the hope that time might eventually ease the sting of this heartbreak. I'd never been a man who craved luxury. My life had always been about family and the intangible riches of love and connection. Now, everything around me seemed hollow, a stark reminder of how quickly material things can lose their value in the absence of trust and love. As I looked around, I realized only a few essentials mattered. A change of clothes, my car, and my laptop. The clearer my thoughts became, the more certain I was of my path forward. I'd pack up and leave, disappearing without a trace. Each encounter with Claire would only reopen the wound, and I couldn't live that way. With a renewed sense of determination, I stood up and moved quickly. In half an hour, I had packed several bags, loaded them into the car, and was ready to leave. It was just before 6 a.m., and though exhausted, I felt a resolve I hadn't felt all night. I allowed myself a brief nap, confident that Claire wouldn't be home until later in the morning. When my phone's alarm woke me at 9 a.m., I wasted no time. I immediately scheduled an urgent meeting with a lawyer, a first step in the legal process that lay ahead. Then, I took a long, cleansing shower, feeling as though I could wash away the remnants of my past. With a heavy heart, I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the table next to the phone. This small but final act marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where I'd be free to seek a life of personal happiness and peace. Finally, I decided to write Claire a letter, a way to convey my disappointment and sorrow one last time. Our conversations had grown futile, full of distance and miscommunication, but I needed her to understand the depth of the hurt she'd caused. I poured my heart into that letter, expressing my emotions clearly and honestly, knowing this would be my farewell. Claire, it breaks my heart to recognize that you've chosen a path of reckless decisions and loneliness, much like your sister. By the time you read this, I'll have removed myself from your life entirely. The depth of your betrayal has left me in pain I can't fully describe. But, despite everything, I am still grateful for the 24 years of happiness we once shared, and for the 2 wonderful children we raised together. I'll keep this farewell brief. I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for, though I can't imagine it will fill the void you've created in our lives. I won't be returning, and I have no desire to see or speak with you again. There is nothing left for us to discuss. Our lawyers can handle the rest, and I ask that you promptly sign the divorce papers. The reason for our separation is unimportant to anyone but us. Sam. By 10 a.m., I was at the bank, addressing our shared finances. I closed our accounts, withdrew our savings and securities, and left enough in our checking account to cover 2 months of mortgage and utility bills, ensuring a smooth transition as we untangled our lives. I also took steps to remove my name from our joint accounts, and when I left the bank, I held a check in hand, a sum of around $250,000 to start over. I arrived at work by noon, surprising my boss, who had expected me to be at the conference in Minnesota. When I shared my intention to resign and relocate, he was initially taken aback. Over the years, our relationship had developed into one of mutual respect. I'd once turned down a promotion so he could keep his position, supporting him through his own divorce a few years back, and that had brought us closer as colleagues and friends. Understanding my situation, he accepted my decision and, unexpectedly, offered me a role in their new Texas division. Though it came with a lower salary, the more affordable cost of living was appealing. We shook hands, and he agreed to let others know I'd left voluntarily. Next, I met with my lawyer, a family friend who had known Claire and me for years. I explained my decision to end the marriage and asked him to handle all proceedings. I also granted Claire the power of attorney to sell the house, which represented half of our assets. Though my lawyer urged me to reconsider a few aspects, advising against rushing such a permanent decision, I knew my mind was made up. Every step I took felt like another necessary piece falling into place, each action further removing me from the life I once had. It was a new beginning, painful but inevitable. I held on to the hope that, with time, I would rebuild my life and rediscover happiness, without Claire and without the memories that now felt so distant. My lawyer, though initially urging me to consider alternatives, soon understood the gravity of the changes I was making. By midnight, I planned to be miles away, in another state, and on the path to a new life without Claire. The day's events had exhausted me, and by late afternoon, fatigue took over. I pulled off the highway and checked into a modest, dated motel around 8 p.m., hoping for a few hours of uninterrupted sleep to clear my mind. As I lay down, I couldn't help but reflect on everything. The pain lingered, but I clung to the hope that with time, I would find a way to heal and rebuild. Using a disposable phone I'd bought specifically for this journey, I dialed Liam's number. He answered quickly, his voice filled with concern as he asked if I'd heard from Mom. I took a deep breath and told him the truth, explaining that I'd uncovered Claire's infidelity the previous day. There was a stunned silence on the other end before he spoke, his disappointment and worry clear. He asked what my next steps would be. I explained that I'd already taken action. I had packed my belongings, cleared out our joint bank accounts, resigned from my job, and was heading south to start anew. I assured him that Claire would be served the divorce papers by the end of the week. Liam was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, he asked if Olivia knew. I told him that she didn't yet, but that I'd be calling her soon and promised to keep him informed as things moved forward. We exchanged words of love and support, and I reassured him that I would take care of myself. Ending the call with Liam, I steeled myself for the next conversation and dialed Olivia's number. Hearing her sadness on the other end was heart-wrenching. I shared the painful truth about her mother's betrayal, and like Liam, she struggled to comprehend how Claire could do this, especially after what her Aunt Isabella had put their family through. After a long silence, Olivia, ever the straightforward one, asked, "Dad, how long has this been going on? When did we stop being enough for her?" Her words hit hard. I tried to comfort her, explaining gently that the duration and reasons no longer mattered as much as the fact that I had loved Claire deeply and trusted her completely, and that she had broken that trust. I reassured Olivia that I would be okay, even though I was incredibly sad. But I told her that, with time and distance, I would find a way to heal. I promised to share my new address, letting her know that she could come visit once her school year was over. Tears welled up in my eyes as I made this promise, feeling a deep ache but also a renewed purpose in knowing that, no matter what, my children still had a place in my life. Finally arriving in Tucson, I visited the new optics division office, a small but promising team of only 30 employees. The district manager, a warm and approachable man, made me feel welcome. In this unfamiliar place, surrounded by new faces, I felt a cautious optimism beginning to grow. I was ready to start over. The district manager, a kind-hearted man with a fatherly demeanor, fostered a sense of camaraderie within the team, and his warmth provided some solace during what was an otherwise difficult transition. A month later, I settled into a charming home in a quiet condominium complex, finding comfort in the fresh start and in the stability of my new surroundings. Throughout this time, I maintained no direct contact with Claire, relying solely on updates from my lawyer and my children. One day, my lawyer called with unexpected news. Claire was prepared to contest the divorce. She wasn't willing to let go and seemed ready to fight to the bitter end, even if it led to financial ruin for both of us. I took a long pause, absorbing the absurdity of it all, and finally instructed him to drop the case. If she wants to hold on, let her, I said calmly. Just tell her that I have no desire to continue this relationship, and I wish her well. She can rebuild her life however she sees fit. After a moment, I added a more pointed message, asking my lawyer to pass along a succinct, "Go to hell." He chuckled, promising to deliver the sentiment but warning it might come with an additional fee. Conversations with my children were another challenge. Each time we spoke, I had to convince them that there was no going back, that the marriage was over. The first real test came when Olivia told me, "Dad, Mom completely freaked out when I mentioned that I planned to live with you this summer." Her reaction was so unsettling that I felt the need to step away from my phone for a few days. Claire's behavior worsened further when Liam told her he'd be splitting his summer between both of us. Despite my resolve to move forward, it wasn't always easy to detach emotionally. Remnants of old feelings for Claire would surface at times, memories of the life we had built before everything fell apart. But with my children's help, I began to learn more about Claire's state of mind. Surprisingly, she was experiencing a deep depression, mirroring the emotional turmoil I had gone through in those first weeks. It was astonishing, even absurd, given what had happened to her sister and the very real consequences of her actions. When you cheat, you devastate the people you're supposed to love, shattering trust and tearing apart your marriage. Typically, people like Claire then move on with their lives, leaving the wreckage behind. But somehow, Claire was struggling, refusing to let go. It seemed her reluctance to proceed with the divorce was a way to avoid facing the truth, that her actions had caused our family to fall apart. While I had finally come to terms with reality, she seemed stuck, refusing to accept the choices she had made. For years, I had thought of Claire as someone who was honest and true, someone who would never betray her family. Now, it was painfully clear that while I had struggled and eventually accepted our broken reality, Claire was still living in denial, clinging to a life that no longer existed. Claire's attempts to reconnect had become relentless. For years, she had used our children as messengers, expressing her remorse and telling them she'd do anything to prove her love, hoping I'd eventually agree to reconciliation. But I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. Our children, caught in the middle, hoped for a reunion but understood my decision. Still, Claire persisted, trying to track down where I lived in one of the southern states. Nearly 3 years had passed since I left, and I thought I'd maintained my privacy. Until one day, as I left work, I spotted her waiting outside. My stomach tightened at the sight. I had no idea how she'd found me, and the shock made me realize I needed to act swiftly. Determined to correct any misconceptions, I discreetly exited through a side door, heart racing, and called Grace. a dear friend who'd become my confidant and steady presence during these years of healing. Grace was a beautiful, caring 30-year-old Latina woman with a 1-year-old child. I knew I could count on her for support in this unexpected encounter. Positioning myself so Claire could see me, I led her to follow as I moved through the city, making a stop at a grocery store to give the impression of normality. Finally, I pulled into my driveway, where Grace, holding her baby, stepped outside, smiling warmly as if we'd been expecting a visitor. Claire parked nearby and hurriedly approached, visibly confused by the sight before her. From my place in the kitchen, I watched her eyes fill with astonishment as Grace greeted her, asking, "Can I help you?" with a polite, accented warmth. Claire stammered, clearly thrown off balance, saying she needed to speak with me. Grace called out to me, and as I stepped outside, I took the baby in my arms, feeling a bittersweet satisfaction. I looked at Claire, forcing a smile, and said with a mix of irony and surprise, well, what brings you here after all this time?" Tears filled Claire's eyes as she whispered, "I needed to apologize, Sam. I'm so deeply sorry for everything. For the pain I caused. For all my mistakes. You were the best husband and father I could have hoped for, and I was foolish to throw it away." Her words were sincere, but I knew this had to be the end. I nodded, keeping my tone light. "It's all right," I replied, feigning an easy happiness. "That's all in the past. I've moved on and I forgive you. I wish you a joyful life filled with love, just like mine." I glanced down at the baby in my arms, her innocent joy radiating, and felt the closure I'd needed. Claire's tears flowed freely, and she murmured something unintelligible as she took a hesitant step forward. She embraced me briefly, lingering as though seeking some connection to the past. But as I pulled back, our eyes met, and we both knew it was truly over. Claire returned to her car, and I watched her drive away, the weight of finality settling over me. Though it had taken nearly 3 years, the chapter was finally closed. As Claire hurriedly left, I closed the door behind her, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering sadness. Grace, sensing the fragility of my emotions, gently took the baby from my arms and hugged me, her warmth steadying me. She kissed my forehead, then reached for her phone. "I need to let Nathaniel know I'll be heading back home with our daughter soon," she said softly, with a comforting confidence. "Thank you, Grace," I whispered, truly grateful for her presence in that moment. "And remind him I'll be waiting for both of you at the barbecue on Saturday." "Absolutely, boss," she replied with a smile, adding, "See you at the office tomorrow." Her easygoing enthusiasm brought me a bit of lightness, helping me feel that life was, indeed, moving forward. The following week, my lawyer informed me that Claire had finally signed the divorce papers. It was a bittersweet moment, yet with that finality, I knew I was truly free to focus on healing at my own pace. Over time, I started building friendships and engaged in a few casual relationships, gradually shedding the nervousness I'd carried around women since the betrayal. With each step, I felt myself regaining confidence, even beginning to consider letting Grace introduce me to someone new. However, Claire's unexpected visit had stirred doubts, not about my choice to leave her, but about my belief that we had nothing left to discuss. I thought she fully understood my feelings on fidelity and what her actions would inevitably lead to. But snippets of her story in those brief moments together made me wonder if I'd avoided a confrontation that might have brought some closure sooner. Yet I couldn't regret my decision. Leaving her had allowed me to rebuild a peaceful, stable life. At the time, any closeness might have made me vulnerable to her remorse, pulling me back into a painful cycle. Now, nearly 3 years after her betrayal, her apology had finally given me a sense of release, a freeing closure that softened the sharp edges of my grief. I could look forward, maybe even to the possibility of finding love again. There was a certain irony in the fact that Claire never knew Grace's child wasn't mine. I didn't owe her that explanation. It was my life now, and my decision alone whether to disclose or keep it to myself. Yet, not long after finding my footing, I was faced with an unexpected tragedy. Yesterday, I stood beside Claire's grave, my children and family around me, including Isabella. I wept bitterly, as did many others. Yet I couldn't help but notice Isabella's dry eyes, her face cold and unmoved. Claire, in a state of despair and inebriation, had been involved in a fatal accident from which she couldn't be saved. My heart ached as I tried to comprehend it all. I wondered why Isabella had ever encouraged her sister toward such a reckless path. A painful clarity dawned on me. Maybe this was Isabella's revenge. Perhaps, in some twisted way, this was how she had sought to even the score for the betrayal Claire and I had revealed, which had led to the end of her marriage to Alex. As I watched Claire's casket descend, one truth settled heavily within me. No matter what I faced ahead, I knew I would never love anyone the way I had loved Claire.